When I was doing my research for the tier list I put out yesterday, one of the tournaments I watched was Area Cup, one of the longer-running competitive tournaments in the Japanese scene. There are a lot of interesting cultural differences between the Western and Japanese competitive scenes, owing to any number of different practical factors like culture, the fact that the game is more popular in Japan, the proximity to Nintendo as a company, and the differences in culture between Nintendo's Japanese headquarters and Nintendo of America. It goes on and on. Life is complicated, don't trust anyone who tells you otherwise. But to zoom way back in, one of the big differences between our communities is that the Japanese scene puts a lot more emphasis on splat zones than other ranked modes, and so Area Cup is one of the most prestigious events in their community. When you watch Splat World Championships, for example, when they give information about the teams and the players, their accomplishments in Area Cup are cited disproportionately to other events. It's been around a long time, well before Splatoon 3 released, and the West has always watched results from that event with interest to see what weapons are being played. In an all-modes tournament, you have the luxury of running the same map in multiple modes and creating variety that way. But with a tournament where only one mode is available, it's going to get pretty samey if you don't play with the full list of maps available in the game, and that means you're going to see some of the weird ones. Now, top Splatoon players are actually a lot more open-minded and willing to experiment than I think they tend to get credit for. People with more limited knowledge of top-level play tend to think, because of interactions with people claiming to know the metagame or which comps are, quote, optimal, that playing the game competitively is reductive, a process of eliminating options that are worse on paper and only practicing the ones people think work the best. In reality, any pattern that you see at top levels of play is generally emerging out of significant experimentation, out of people throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks behind the scenes in hours and hours of scrims that none of the rest of us are seeing. Top players who want to succeed in Nintendo tournaments are going to have to play less desirable maps along the way, and so the teams that want to succeed don't just ignore those maps. Even in the West, we do have a few single-mode tournaments, like In the Zone, for example. But from my personal experience, the prevailing map lists that competitive teams are practicing for tend to be the all-modes map lists that narrow things down to the map modes competitive Western players really tend to like, the ones we feel are most expressive, that allow for the greatest variety of strategies. Grab a typical low or mid-level team right now and throw them on mincemeat, and I'm not sure they've got a game plan ready to go in the same way that they'll know what their plans are for Mako Mart. I remember the first time I tried playing against a team running double splash, double machine on Mahi Mahi, and quickly realizing that once anyone on the enemy team got a special, they locked out almost the whole map, and we just didn't feel like we could play the game anymore. I don't remember that experience fondly. Mahi is up there on my list of least favorite Splatoon maps of all time. It doesn't feel as expressive to me in the way that something like the Reef was in Splatoon 2, a map with multiple options, not even to get through mid, but to get to the other side of the map without having to go through mid in the first place. It was a map where it felt like teams got to approach it the way they wanted to, coming up with different solutions to the same problem. On Mahi, I might have said after that game, gameplay degenerated to spamming whatever options clogged up choke points the most. What's interesting to me about that assumption, though, is that on those kinds of maps, watching Area Cup, we tend to see some weapon comps that a Western player would call really unorthodox. To be fair, Japanese players have always had different perspectives on weapon viability, even on maps we both play. It's happened a number of times that a Japanese player has picked a weapon the West had thought was useless to some significant tournament success, and the result reinvigorated experimentation with it in the West. This happened in Splatoon 2 with the Tentombrella, for example, and it happened again more recently with the Snipe Rider. Top Western players have noted at times that scrimming top Japanese teams actually doesn't prepare them as well as they'd like for when they come back to Western tournaments, because they're simply having to counterplay completely different strategies than they'll have to beat in their own regions. But I think another part of the reason top Japanese players have different comps than we do is that in being in a format where they could have to play any map in the game, they develop strategies that work in a wider variety of situations than you'd see in a more curated map list. I've been thinking if this might not be part of the reason why, for example, Japanese top players never really gave up on InkVac the way that Western players had up until it got buffed recently. I did a double take a couple times when I saw Zone Cup comps on older patches with vanilla jet squelchers. On a map like the Reef, Inkvac would get flanked from all sorts of places. But on Hammerhead Bridge, there's only one direction anyone's coming from. The Sorella Tentabrella is pretty situational, and we're really only seeing it get used right now by players who were top Tentabrella players in Splatoon 2. But if you have to play Mincemeat Metalworks, you know what? I get it. That's one of the only ways anyone's ever getting across the bridge in the middle of that map. It draws a lot of firepower away from other things, and it's very annoying to try and get rid of. I'm not going to say I ever want to have to play Mahi Mahi or Mincemeat in a big tournament that means something to me. I don't think a map that demands you to brute force your way through easily defensible choke points is the best that this game has to offer. But I also think that it's valuable to play on them, even in scrims, because even if you aren't prepping for a tournament that has those maps, when something forces you to think about the game differently than you normally do, it tests your assumptions about how the game really works. There's a series of tournaments called Bad Ideas Only, where every event features a new gimmick rule set. They'll restrict the weapons players choose, like forcing everyone to play Reef Slider weapons, or giving the opposing team the ability to ban certain weapons from being played, or screwing around with the traditional tournament format. I think this tournament, beyond just being a fun change of pace, has legitimate value for getting more competitive players to think about the game differently. When we as humans play with something, we have fun, but we're also learning about it in the process. And this is an example of tournament organizers and players agreeing to play with Splatoon tournaments. Try something silly, see what happens. So next time a solo queue rotation rolls around, and it's a map that makes you reflexively roll your eyes, maybe think for a second before picking up a different playlist. Am I deciding not to play this because I know what it'll be like and I don't want to play it? Or am I deciding not to play it because I actually don't know how I need to play differently to be successful there? If you avoid the map every time it shows up in the rotations, then when was the last time that you actually played there? Is that map going to be a liability for your team at some future Nintendo tournament? I think it's worth at least sparing it a thought.